Good afternoon, this is Talk. I'm Peter Cardwell, and I expect you, like me, have been very moved by the words of Aviva Segal, who is a former Hamas hostage. Her husband Keith is still in captivity. He is still being held hostage by Hamas terrorists in Gaza. It was just an incredibly moving interview. I really tried to just shut up and let her speak because her testimony was just so incredibly moving. And Mary from County Down has been in touch and said, heartbreaking and powerful testimony from Aviva is reminiscent of the testimony given by Holocaust survivors in programmes recorded decades ago. The way the Nazis treated the Jews is unconscionable. The Jewish people have been put through this hell again. I'm in awe of Aviva's strength and her determination to make sure the world knows what is happening and is still happening to the hostages, including her husband Keith. And her compassion for the ordinary Palestinian people is also very moving, sending love to her and her family. I think Mary has just absolutely encapsulated all my thoughts on that. Absolutely great message after a very powerful and moving interview. I know Gary Mond, who is the chairman of the National Jewish Assembly, was watching that. We actually asked him all to talk about something else. But Gary, your reaction to what Aviva said there, if you would. Good afternoon to you.
Well, words like heartbreaking, tragic, moving are just not strong enough. I can't think of words that are strong enough to describe what has happened. It is just absolutely sickening. The way these monsters have behaved. And of course, they are responsible for the war. If they hadn't invaded Israel on the 7th of October and butchered 1,200 people to death and taken 250 hostages, there wouldn't be a war going on now. People should never forget that in all of the debate they're having. I would say, however, that the decisions that Benjamin Netanyahu now has to make are very difficult. Because on the one hand, if a deal is done, he might be able to get something like 20 to 30 of the hostages still there out alive, and hopefully Keith would be among them. But all the other hostages that would still be there would probably be left to rot. And the deal that Hamas is seeking is one that would enable them to regroup, rebuild, and essentially repeat the horrible situation on the 7th of October again.
I want to ask you, Gary, about a clip that a viewer actually sent me. This is in regard to what's happened in this country over the past couple of weeks, because we've had the riots, of course, we've had the horrendous knife attack in Southport, and there are lots of people asking what the source of the anger is, the source of the riots, the fact that these did not happen out of nowhere. That's not to excuse anything for a second that anybody has done that's illegal, and the courts are acting on that, and of course justice has been very swift and very brutal. And in fact, the Director of Public Prosecutions is in the Sunday Times today saying that people could actually be banged up for 10 years, sent to prison for 10 years as a result of rioting. But I just want to play you a clip that this viewer sent me of what is happening at what had been dubbed an anti-racism demonstration, because there are lots of counter-protests, but I have a few suspicions about who's organising them and what their thoughts may be. And if someone's against racism, great. But let's actually see what someone said at one of those counter-demonstrations. This was sent in to me by a viewer. Let's play this.
Palestinian torture camps, illegal Israeli settlements and illegal occupation of large swaths of Palestinian land, all underpinned by an international criminal court ruling that Israel is committing genocide and are practicing apartheid, is the reason why we are seeing racism against predominantly Muslim communities. Yes. Because Muslim lives, Palestinian lives, and brown bodies have been dehumanised in our mainstream media and by our mainstream politicians.
I mean, that rant was both ridiculous and false in many ways. Gary, your reaction to it?
Where to begin? Firstly, she talks about Palestinian land. There is no Palestinian land. There is disputed territories. Palestine, to the extent it existed, was in the Mandate period between 1919 and 1948, and everything that was Palestinian there was actually Jewish newspapers, Jewish coins, Jewish football teams, and so on. That's the first thing. The second thing is she talks about genocide. What genocide? Those who have suffered genocides in the past have been the Jews. And that's not just in the Holocaust, but also in the Middle Eastern countries where
that's
Jews...
actually a highly offensive term to use in relation, and it's not an accident that person is using that, and it's not just her, it's many anti-Israeli people who use that term very, very loosely.
They do. I think the word genocide needs to be properly explained to them, what it is. There was an attempt, and I'm not talking here about the Holocaust, just looking in the Arab countries around 1948 to eliminate the Jewish populations. And those that were able to managed to flee. Fortunately, Israel existed then and they had somewhere to flee to. The idea that there is an intention on the part of the IDF to actually commit genocide is ludicrous. They are defending Israel. They are seeking to hunt out and kill the terrorists who were behind the 7th of October and is still engaging in terrorist activities and holding the hostages. And if any innocent Gazans actually die as a result, it is unfortunate and it is to be regretted bitterly. Because what Hamas uses them, it uses them as human shields, as we saw in the incident yesterday. A school was attacked. Well, the school wasn't really loads of children there. The school has been closed for nearly a year. There were 20 to 30 Hamas terrorists who were attacked and killed by the IDF yesterday.
They say 19 there, certainly. It's very, although there of course have been civilian casualties, and we absolutely cannot forget that. Another listener actually was in touch with me to send me a picture of a flyer that went out here in the UK in Finchley. There was a counter demonstration as well, and the words on the flyer, which was a digital thing, were about, come to this rally and deal with, be against racists, be against people who are being horrible to lots of ethnic minorities, but also it said anti-Zionist rally as well. I mean, that to me is racist, Gary.
I agree completely. My thinking is that those behind the Jew hate protests have been taking place every Saturday, which are allegedly called pro-Palestinian protests. Many of these same people like to get involved in demonstrations wherever they can, and they have to some extent hijacked the anti-racist process.
And there will be many, many people who go on anti-racist protests, for example, who are there for genuine reasons. But I mean, if I went on one of those and that person who we played in the clip was saying those things, I'd walk away. I mean, that has been, as you say, totally hijacked. And actually, to blame Israel for what's happening in this country is as ludicrous as blaming, I don't know, Russia, South Africa, America, whatever. It is a very sad state of affairs, especially when there are very well-intentioned people who will have turned up to those events.
I completely agree, and our chief rabbi spoke about it a couple of days ago, saying that Jews in this country have nowhere to go between the hatred from the far right and the hatred from the far left and from Islamists.
Gary, thank you for your perspective. Gary Mond there, who's the chairman of the National Jewish Assembly. We've decided actually here between ourselves, Chris, the producer, and me, that we're going to play that interview again a little bit later in the hour with Aviva Segal, the former hostage who was in Hamas captivity for 51 days. I can honestly say I don't think I've ever had an interview quite like it. I don't think I've ever been quite affected by that. I've spoken to people who are family members. We did that a couple of weeks ago here in London. Aviva spoke to us from Israel, of course, and I just cannot imagine what kind of life she is living. I cannot imagine what she goes through on a daily basis, and Gary reflected a bit on that and also talked about how important it is for us here in this country, actually, to be really careful about the kind of words that we have, the perspective that we have. We try to give some sort of perspective on this. That is in some way balanced. And Gary talks there about how much misinformation, disinformation is out there. We never ever forget the innocent people of Gaza, the fact that there were many of them. We don't know how many because we've got to be sceptical about Hamas figures, but clearly what happened yesterday in Gaza was a horrendous thing. The IDF dropped those bombs. They say it was to kill 19 jihadis, 19 Islamist terrorists. And this war continues, and as we heard from Ehud Barak as well, there just doesn't seem to be any end in sight. Well, we're going to change the tone a little bit.